We're still here on The Point of View, and it's a double-decker. I started off with an author of a book on J.B. Danquah who says he wants to correct some of the misimpressions around J.B. My main Nkrumahist and man I interview when it comes to the ideas of Nkrumah is Dr. Nii Moi Thompson, who is now the board chair.
Chairman of the commission.
Chairman, it confuses me. The chairman of the commission.
I used to be the director general.
This is what Kwesi Bocho used to do.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. So it's fair to call you an Nkrumahist. The first time I came across you, of course, you used to write in the Daily Graphic, but then you were part of a group called the Patriots.
Yes,
many years ago, and you were the
ago.
Nkrumah people.
Yes, the CPP Patriots.
I think there was Bright Akwete was part.
Oh, Professor Akosa, Kwame Nkrumah, Kosidede.
Yes, Kosidede was even on set today. Kwame Nkrumah was also there.
Oh, is that so?
And then I think Professor George Penny Hagan, you can say, was CPP's flag bearer some time ago.
Some time ago, right, he was.
Akosa was also there.
Yes.
And then there was an economist, another Greek economist.
Which one would this be?
I forget his name.
With the Patriots or with CPP?
With the Patriots.
Okay.
And a Greek economist.
Okay. Not Dr. K.
So what were you guys trying to do with the Patriots?
At the time, the ideal was to revive the CPP. Okay. So we actually went around seeking to rebuild the CPP from the ground on up. But of course, there had been seismic changes over time. So it was kind of hard to do that after being suppressed and outlawed for many years. It was hard to revive it. So the idealism and the emotional attachment, yes, remained. But the reality had changed. And the nature of our political party system, the first past the post, is such that political parties ultimately always gravitate towards two dominant ones, no matter how hard you try. And we've seen that on both sides. We've seen Rukubire's attempt, we've seen the National Reform Party and other things. So eventually...
So you lean towards the closest relative of the CPP, which would then be NDC?
Precisely, but there's always a distinction between being an Nkrumahist and being a member of the CPP. Okay. You can be an Nkrumahist without necessarily belonging to the CPP.
Okay.
And we have Nkrumahists outside of Ghana.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's that critical
So
distinction.
who is an Nkrumahist?
Nkrumahist is anyone who subscribes to the ideals or ideologies or beliefs of Kwame Nkrumah, economic independence, Pan-Africanism, and all those other ideals.
So all Nkrumahists believe in not just political independence, but economic liberation.
Yes.
Not just of Ghana, but the whole of Africa.
Precisely.
And they see neocolonialism as the extension of imperialism.
Exactly.
So neocolonialism is also a problem
Precisely.
for them.
Yes.
So I think I get that. So, but you're also a Marcus Garveyist. That's what confuses me now.
Big time.
So was Garvey Nkrumah's mentor then?
Yes, precisely. Nkrumah actually pays glowing tribute
to Marcus Garvey.
That of all the books that he read while he was abroad, only Marcus Garvey's book, and I have a copy, it's a powerful book. Of all the books that he read the whole while, only Marcus Garvey's book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, fired up his imagination. And it's the kind of book that you read and you want to get on the plane and come back to Ghana or anywhere in Africa. And it's part of the thing that actually spurred me to leave New York and come to Ghana.
So what was Garvey's main idea?
Basically, back to Africa, empowerment of the black man. He used Africans synonymously with black people for obvious reasons. Of course, we have more than black people in Africa. But he was the expression, Africa for Africans. And if you receive a private email from me, you see at the bottom, or you come into my house, the first thing you see on the wall is Garvey and Nkrumah, and they're saying, Garvey says, what others have done, we can do. It covers so much. It means so much.
So Garvey was the principal inspiration of Nkrumah.
Definitely.
Although he had a good relationship with George Padmore and W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes. And it's interesting because Garvey and Du Bois were like bitter rivals. They insulted each other.
They had different ideas about achieving the same aim.
Not necessarily. Du Bois felt, Du Bois' position was that of integration, that black Americans don't have to come to Africa to live a better life, that they were entitled to the America that they helped build, so they should stay there and take advantage of it. And Garvey's position was that no matter what you do,
come back home.
You're not going to come back to Africa and let's build Africa.
Including his proposal for a shipping line and all of that.
He did establish the shipping line. He had the Black Cross Auxiliary after the Red Cross. He had the Black, he named so many things after the term black. And this is what I was raising in an article recently that I wrote challenging some historical accounts that the term Black Star was coined by someone 300 years ago. It was actually coined by Marcus Garvey. And it was based on the tour that he had in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Canada. And he realized that no matter where he went, black people, whether they were in the majority, whether they were in the minority, they were always at the bottom of the economic ladder. So then he said, I will not rest until I make Africa the black star among the constellation of nations.
Oh,
and that's where the name
came
from. Yes, the black star among the constellation of nations. Then he forms the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Mind you, the term Negro is actually originally Spanish or Portuguese, meaning black, negro. And then the English version, of course, is black. So you have the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, for repatriation. So if you listen to some of the reggae music, some of them actually do refer to repatriation, like Dennis Brown. But Marley doesn't do much about repatriation. He's more
there's a song he talks about repatriation.
Yes, he does mention that, but I'm talking about those who espouse the message itself.
Okay.
But whereas Du Bois, as I said, was more of an integrationist, the irony here is that in the end, Du Bois actually died on African soil, and Marcus Garvey died in London.
It's one of the
humorous but they were
so
very
they're rivals. What about George Padmore?
George Padmore was Nkrumah's political advisor. They had met in London during the Pan-African conference, and Nkrumah invited all these people to come and join him, provide intellectual guidance. And it was in Padmore's book, The Gold Coast Revolution, that we are told that the Big Six actually did not, quote unquote, initiate the demonstrations of 1948, and that they were more or less accidental beneficiaries, the British.
Because it was Nii Kwabena Bonne's boycott.
Well, there were two things, the convergence of two events. Nii Kwabena Bonne advocated a boycott of the European merchants, AWAM, Association of West African Merchants. He wasn't advocating for independence per se. Yeah. Yes. And then you have the ex-servicemen's union, who are also advocating for payment of their benefits from the war. They also were not openly advocating for independence.
So almost two unrelated agitations,
yes.
Which the political people took advantage of.
But they did say that. They said, listen, now let's take advantage of this thing here to spur our own message. That's when Danquah wrote the thing that the young man wrote, that, this is a time, get rid of the governor, we are prepared to take over. There were two statements that were written by the leadership of the UGCC then. Danquah wrote the long one, that's what this gentleman read, and then Nkrumah wrote a shorter one, but addressed to more than the secretary to the colonies. He addressed it to the New York Times, to all sorts of organizations around the world, to give his, or at least his view of the struggle.
On what should
happen.
On
an international flavor.
So 48 was definitely a turning point.
It was a turning point in many ways, yes.
And then the arrest of the six pushed them into prominence.
Yes, the six met later on to see how they could take advantage of what had happened. And then Gerald Christie, who had just, by the various accounts that we've seen, he was new. And he was taken aback. He hadn't experienced anything like that. So he's like, okay, let me just arrest these guys. But they really had nothing to do with either of the two events. And then Nkrumah himself says that in his autobiography, that he was aware of the ex-servicemen's unions planning to have the demonstration. Even he and Danquah had addressed them before at a rally. But in terms of planning, they had nothing to do with that. And it's critical because, again, one of the false histories that were told on television that I had to come out to clarify was that somehow Nkrumah had, Akweje had dictated the petition to Kwame Nkrumah, and Kwame Nkrumah put a piece of paper on somebody's back, and when the white people saw the handwriting, they said, no, this is Kwame Nkrumah. It's all a lie, it never happened. The actual signatory, the person who signed the petition, was the president of the ex-servicemen's union, called B.E.A. Tamaklo. He was the president. And he was supported by 7 other people. So if anything, we want to call anything big, maybe Big 8. They actually signed the petition along with B.E.A. Tamaklo.
Yeah.
The letter went to the governor. The governor responded to B.E.A. Tamaklo. the permit for the demonstration itself was issued in the name of BEA Tamaklo. So none of the UGCC members were involved in the organization. And of course, they have sympathies.
But it was clear from the time in prison together, and I think PSA mentions it, that Nkrumah realized that his approach and their approach was different.
Certainly.
So the split, sort of, they knew they couldn't be together after that encounter in prison.
That's because Nkrumah was a man in a hurry, and he was exposed to political organization in a way that these other gentlemen, mostly lawyers, rich merchants, who like to take their time to do things. Nkrumah had been involved in political mobilization in the US. He had lived a hard life. At some point, he even sold fish in the streets of Harlem. So he was exposed to all these things, black preachers. So he had this power of oratory and power of organization and mobilization. So in a sense, he knew what to do and how to do it. The problem with the other group is that they knew what to do, but they didn't know how to do it in terms of political mobilization. And that's what led to this split. But when he came in, by various accounts, there's several books that have been written. Kentinka Danquah Fodro, he's written the Danquah Busia tradition and the politics of Ghana. He recounts some of these things. So he was like a man in a hurry. He helped open the first national offices and so forth. And then you had people who thought that he was using the party for his own personal ends. That came when he formed the Committee of Youth Organizations, which is to spur the youth and all that. They're like, oh no, this guy is up to something else.
A previous speaker says Nkrumah deceived Ghanaians and demonized JB Danquah, telling them that JB had taken a bribe, which is why sort of Ghanaians were no longer favorably disposed to JB Danquah. And he seeks to correct that in his book, that JB Danquah had gone for a different assignment, but Nkrumah took advantage of his absence and that of the others to entrench himself. I don't know if you've read anything on that.
No, the thing is that you have to understand the politics of the time. They were hurling insults and accusations in both directions.
Okay.
It wasn't just Nkrumah making allegations or hurling insults. They were also insulting him for all sorts of things. So it was within this context that the issue of who was who or who favored what came in. But we cannot play down or dismiss J.B. Danquah's role before Nkrumah came, and even in the first term of Nkrumah. J.B. Danquah was more or less a protege of Kingsley Hayford. And so, and during this period...
J.E. Kingsley Hayford.
Yeah, J.E. Kingsley Hayford. And during this period, Danquah himself was involved in the youth movements and so forth and so on. And this is one reason why the Watson Commission referred him as the doyen of Gold Coast. But yeah, because he had been involved in these things. And even after, sometimes I think we exaggerate the differences between him and Nkrumah. And I think it's rather tragic the way he died. Because they did, to a very large extent, work together. Nkrumah indeed did build on some of the progress that J.B. Danquah made before Nkrumah himself came. It was J.B. Danquah's efforts that actually got the Santehene to renounce the Ashanti Confederation Council and to join the Legislative Council towards the formation of one nation state. It was a major event. So even before Nkrumah came in, we had this major move. And if you read Danquah Fodro's book, Danquah did this through secret diplomacy, by secretly engaging the Asantehene and telling them, listen, we are better off by working together.
And because he was partly Asante and his brother was the Ochehene, he also has some leverage with the chiefs.
The chiefs, yeah, exactly. He was royal. He was related to...
So he knew how to engage them, and he was also an intellectual. So
exactly.
Also,
even though there had been a breach between the intellectuals of the Gold Coast and the chiefs at some point.
So he's like the bridge.
Precisely,
like the bridge.
Because he belonged to both worlds. He belonged to a royal family, and he was also an intellectual. So how do you bridge the two? And so he helped to do these things. When Nkrumah himself came into office in 1951, one of the first things he did, well, he did a number of things, but one of them was to form the first, shall we say, all-inclusive government, building on, of course, on what Danquah had done before, by inviting the Asante Council's representative, a fellow by the name of E.O. Asafweje, to become part of the CPP government against opposition from the foot soldiers of the CPP. They're like, no, we don't want anybody from Asante Council to be a member of the party. We fought for the struggle.
And Asafa was one of their first lawyers.
Exactly. No, he was actually minister for.
Yes, I'm told he's the first Ashanti lawyer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he was a lawyer. He was a very prominent
solid
lawyer.
Guy.
There's another fellow from the northern provinces, northern territories, that Nkrumah brought in to form this government of national unity. And let me just state that what Nkrumah's conception of national development was, because it was this framework that governed his approach to everything. And within that context, people fail to realize that he worked very, very closely with Danquah also. In fact, there was a major corruption investigation that was initiated at the instance of Danquah. And Nkrumah was more than willing to listen. There was a time he even nominated Danquah to some judicial commission, and I think the party foot soldiers again kicked. So foot soldiers have been influential for quite some time. But Nkrumah's view of national development was based on two pillars. The first one was on nation building, which is to hold together the nation as we had inherited it. The Northern Territories, Ashanti, Transvolta, the Gold Coast proper, so that it wouldn't break up. And then the other pillar was socioeconomic progress. And this is where he gradually then had to become tough on certain groups to prevent the disintegration of the country we knew then as Gold Coast and now Ghana. So I personally find it ironic that in the past few weeks, at least, Nkrumah has come under this gratuitous, relentless attacks. He was a dictator and so forth and so on. The irony here is that the very things he did that preserved the integrity of this country is what they're accusing him of.
So are you saying that had he not done the things he did, the union was possibly going to break?
We may not have gone as we know it today. We may not.
Wow.
The Avoidance of Discrimination Act, 1957, which preceded, because the various political parties anticipated the Avoidance of Discrimination Act. That's when they formed the United Party, UP Party, after independence, November 1957. The Avoidance of Discrimination Act was December 1957, and it outlawed parties by ethnic names. So as we speak, you cannot form a political party in Ghana based on ethnic names. This goes back to...
Oh, which was why the UP came with the Northern People's Party,
exactly,
the Eweland Congress, and
that's
all
how
this.
they all came together, including Gashifimokwe, Wasa Youth Association.
They had to come to unite.
Exactly, that's what United Party was.
So you think that's one of Nkrumah's legacies in putting the nation...
It wasn't intended to unite them, but united them.
Because he outlawed...
He outlawed that. You couldn't, as we speak, you cannot set up a political party with a religious name.
Wow.
We had the MAP, Muslim Association Party. We had the Gashifimokwe. It wasn't a party, but it operated as such with that name. They also, UP actually was launched here in Accra with Atokwashi and all those people in attendance here in Accra as a result of that. So it's ironic that we would accuse him for something that held Ghana together.
Well, you can both truth can coexist, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody can do things to preserve the union but also be dictatorial, but that's not even my point. What was his relationship with chiefs like, based on all your readings and because there's a certain sense that Nkrumah and the chiefs were not the best of friends. Maybe we'll let you think through that. Let's take a short break, guys, so that I'll wrap up. Let's take a short break. This is the point of view. My guest, Dr. Nii Moi Thompson, for the second part of the show, whilst we discuss the role of Nkrumah in our independence, having discussed JB Danquah, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're still talking Ghana's independence, our history, and now we're looking at Nkrumah more closely. So you've argued that the Discrimination Act that Nkrumah...
Avoidance of Discrimination
was
Act.
very critical in the way eventually Ghana would become.
Yes.
What was his relationship with chiefs like? Because I have this sense that he and chiefs were not the best of friends.
It depends, it depended then.
Okay.
It was pretty much transactional. There were some chiefs that supported his vision and agenda, and they were safe. And those who sought to subvert his agenda, obviously, were on his wrong side. Perhaps I should use the opportunity then to address his relationship with Ashanti in particular, because there's been this misconception that Nkrumah hated Ashanti and Ashanti also hated Nkrumah and the CPP. Nothing could be further from the truth. There was a brief period of violence, yes, 1954, 1955, and 1956, when the National Liberation Movement was formed. But overall, the CPP had a massive impact in Ashanti and Kumasi in particular before the 1954 elections. And the irony, again, is that the trigger was over cocoa prices. It's funny that we are talking about cocoa prices.
So Balfour said Akoto.
No, but before Balfour said, no. So Nkrumah then says, listen, it's funny that it's happening now, that cocoa prices fluctuate a lot.
Yeah.
What we want to propose, and it was called the Cocoa Duty and Development Fund Amendment Bill.
Okay.
Yes. And Nkrumah said, listen, we're going to fix the price of cocoa. All right? It fluctuates a lot. When it is below the fixed price, we will pay you still the fixed price. But when it's above that, we will keep the difference in the special fund for development and also to support cocoa farmers.
Okay.
This was the basis of that. Now, the small or smaller cocoa farmers actually favored that because Nkrumah before then had even been giving them subsidized loans during the lean season.
Okay.
And so this was meant to be part of the development approach. That, okay, we'll fix the price. Yeah. If it's low, we pay you whatever, and they decide and that. But then there were disaffected members in the CPP who then took it, because in those days, elections weren't straightforward. Sometimes the Central Committee chose candidates as a way of managing balance, regional balance, gender balance, and those who were not chosen then became independent candidates, or they simply went out to help form other parties.
Okay.
So they then got angry with Kwame Nkrumah, and they formed what was known as Council for Higher Cocoa Prices.
Wow.
Yes. And it was out of that that then the National Liberation Party, not even movement, it was called National Liberation Party.
Okay.
And the Ashanti opposed that. Ashanti had always insisted that Ashanti's system of governance was superior to that of the British. The party system was too destructive and so forth. And so
he wasn't encouraging political parties being formed.
Exactly, but then they changed the name, but for all practical purposes, they operated as a party.
Oh,
but the name was changed from National Liberation Party to National Liberation Movement.
Okay.
So if you read Dennis Austin's book, Politics in Ghana, 1946 to 1960, when Balfour Sakoto presented the NLM to the Ashanti Council, he actually emphasized the fact that this is not a party, this is a movement.
Because he knew that Santini would not favor
they always felt that their system was superior. But even though they were still stuck with these British things. So yes, I've always found the irony now that we are talking about cocoa prices and cocoa. But this happened 75 years ago when he took over. But his system, his relationship with the chiefs, as I said, were dependent on their own role in the national development agenda. I just read not long ago, a couple of years ago, in June Millen. I don't know if you know June Millen. She was the executrix for Kwame Nkrumah. She wrote a biography of Kwame Nkrumah. And in that book, she actually says that the name Osajifo was given to Kwame Nkrumah by the Asantehene.
Is it?
Yes. And Asantehene, Kwame Nkrumah then had to bring it before cabinet, I think, for them to approve before he actually started using that. So it's in June Millen's.
So it was given to him by the Asantehene?
Yes.
Osajifo?
Yes. And then people also tend to ignore. For one thing, Nkrumah had great admiration for the Ashantis. One, for their bravery in fighting the British. You know what they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah. And so Nkrumah hated imperialism. The Ashanti had fought them. So he had this respect for Ashantis in general. So besides bringing on Asafo as a member, in 1952, he launches the Accelerated Education Program. The Accelerated Education Program. Ashanti was the earliest beneficiaries of the Accelerated Education Program. KNUST was formed from that. Opokuware was formed from that. There were many schools that were built. I don't know if you ever heard of Akosa Primary School at North Centreso. It was actually named after Professor Akosa, Bedouin Akosa now. His father, who was a commissioner at Sechere West or Sechere East, he was a CPP district commissioner, but he had a house at North Centreso. And so they named Akosa School after him. And I also happened, that's where I actually started school, Akosa Primary.
So you have some Kumasi upbringing, which is why you understand these things a bit better.
Yes, but it's only now. Of course, growing up, I didn't really relate. If I was a kid when Nkrumah was overthrown, and all I remember people singing CD Kwasi ABT, that's all I know.
Wow.
It wasn't until I grew up that I started looking back and realizing the contributions of Nkrumah to Ashanti region.
But the main Ashanti in his government was Krobeduse, correct?
Say that again?
Krobeduse was one of the main Ashanti people.
Oh, certainly. But there were others.
What about Jantua? Was Jantua also
the
from Ashanti?
Jantua brothers, not just one Jantua. Kwame Jantua, Nanaya's father, F.A. Jantua, and her uncle, F.A.'s brother, KSP, were both members of the CPP.
So Jantua and then, of course, Krobeduse being the most prominent minister.
But there were several others. Some of the most prolific writers for the CPP were from Danquah, actually. They used to have something called the Danquah Literary Society, among the most educated in the Gold Coast. Wow. They all contributed to that. But there were lesser known people. But the point is that because of this work that Nkrumah's affection for Ashanti, people fail to realize that Kumasi was a CPP stronghold in the 1950 municipal elections. CPP won all 6 seats, wards.
Kumasi was
a CPP stronghold. They won 6. They were disqualified for 1, so they lost that one.
Serious?
Yes. Casely Hayford, Archie, who later on worked with, he was a councillor, what we call the assemblyman in Kumasi, Bantama. Really? And he later represented Bantama in the Legislative Assembly. Casely Hayford, you can check that. Wow. And so the CP was very popular. It was in Kumasi that this lady, I just learned from Nana Nketia that it was actually from Salpon, but she went to Kumasi and slashed her face with a blade and used the blood to pledge allegiance to the CPP. And she actually changed her name. Till now, everybody refers to her as Ama Nkrumah, which is the female version of Kwame Nkrumah, but no one knows her real name. So Nkrumah had this relationship. The Ashanti chiefs who were on board with his agenda, he was okay with them. Those, and not just Ashanti chiefs, but chiefs anywhere, whom he felt were against the nationalist agenda. Don't forget, the chiefs had been the face of indirect rule by the colonialists. And so there was some tension, even before Nkrumah came back to Ghana, between the Aborigines Rights Society and the chiefs. They felt that the chiefs had allowed themselves to be used by the British. So there was this tension, and it took a while to work it out. But Nkrumah was more practical about that. I have no problem with chiefs. It's part of our governance system. But as long as they are willing to work with my government, why not? We'll work.
What was Nkrumah's legacy around uniting the country? Some people say his ideas around secondary education were meant to, I won't call it detribalize, but essentially to reduce ethnic rivalries.
That was more like a side benefit of this boarding school system. The boarding school system had been started long before Nkrumah became prime minister. The mission schools started, and it started for the most it became a model for the most practical of reasons. We're highly rural back then, and so to be able to give education to the most people from the most deprived areas, you had to pick them all and put them in one particular area. You couldn't open secondary schools all over. So it was so it wasn't uniquely a Kwame Nkrumah idea. It had existed before Nkrumah himself became prime minister. The question now is, do we still have to?
But he did start some schools.
Oh, he did. So
like Swedru Secondary School. They were the so-called, they call it the Ghana Trust schools.
Yes, yes. After some of the students had been dismissed for participating, and then Ghana National College and all that. Definitely he did that. But then, again, the one thing I forgot to mention in the accelerated education program was that he made primary education free for the first time in the Gold Coast.
Even then?
That was 1952. And then the 1961 Education Act made primary education compulsory.
Okay.
And then 1973, 79, 7-year development plan, then brought in secondary school, because we had a situation where primary education was free and compulsory. University was free, but the middle part wasn't. So the 7-year development plan was going to close that gap. And then these started with textbooks and so forth and so on. And then the coup came along, and that then fell off the...
Who was Arthur Lewis?
Arthur Lewis, you mean the economist? Yes, I think he was from St. Lucia. He was a Nobel economist, and Nkrumah brought him in as an advisor. Nkrumah had a lot of advisors, top flight advisors who came in, and Arthur Lewis was one of them, advising on
the economic.
Yeah, economic growth, and not just economic growth, but the approach.
So he was a development economist.
He was a development economist talking about surplus labor in agriculture, the fact that productivity is low. We need to build up productivity, and that once you build up productivity in agriculture, the surplus labor will have to be moved into other non-agricultural sectors and all that. But again, because Nkrumah was a politician, his sense of urgency was different from that of Lewis. So Lewis may have been technically right, but a politician will always tell you, listen, I have an election to win, I have a mandate to deliver. But yes, Lewis did make quite some sound pieces of advice to Kwame Nkrumah. The issue also that I think we need to touch on is how gradually we moved to the kind of high-handedness, if you will, of Kwame Nkrumah, which people are now using against him. Because we need to look to understand how we have things like the PDA, the Avoidance of Discrimination Act. You need to look at the evolution of elections during this period. Because I mentioned the 1951 election where the CPP won. Just imagine 34 out of 38 seats. They won everything. The remaining 4, Danquah and Oforiatta won 2. Danquah won 53%, Oforiatta won 51, thereabout, and then the other 2 were independents. Busia, and this is very funny, Busia lost his seat, his the role at Winchi. But then he went through the Ashanti Council. In those days, what later became Brong-Ahafo was part of Ashanti. So Busia then went through the Ashanti Council. But it wasn't as easy as he thought. He had to compete with others. Again, he competed, then he came in 7th.
Wow.
So the person who actually won then says, okay, Prof, you take it. So then Busia, that's how come Busia ended up in the first legislative assembly. And Krobodusa used to tease him that you came in through the back door.
Wow.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So that was 51. So after the defeat of the UGCC by Nkrumah in 51, the party then collapses, and Busia then takes the lead of setting up the GCP, Ghana Congress Party, along with Danquah and some disaffected members of the CPP. Then comes the 1954 elections. And out of 104 seats, the GCP won only 1. The CPP won 72. The GCP won only 1.
Wow.
And that one was won by Dr. Busia. And he won by 11 votes.
Wow.
That's how close.
So Nkrumah was an absolute dominant political force in our first 15 years.
In more ways than one. That's how come even when he was overthrown, the only way the opposition members could win elections was to outlaw his picture, outlaw his name, outlaw his party.
He was too deeply imprinted in people's minds.
The CP would have won the 1969 elections.
Which takes me to Kotoka and the airport. Your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot of people who feel this is the right thing to do. I think there was a survey, I don't know, but a lot of people believe that the name should go.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've CPP, but what else? The CPP has always been that position. But it reminds me of my own childhood during the coup, and we actually taught a song by, I don't know, maybe Ghana Education Service about Kotoka. Let Ndefna Kotoka rest in peace. This was after he was assassinated. But I remember us singing it in private. But no, it's the right decision. It's the right decision that the government finally made. The CPP had always advocated that. Some people said that it should be named after Kwame Nkrumah. Personally, I wasn't even in favor of it. I think Nkrumah is, to a large extent, synonymous with Ghana, and he doesn't really need an airport named after him. He's a global phenomenon. So
the Accra International Airport is okay.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Some people think that history has many dimensions, and we should live with Kotoka's name. It's part of our history. Even though you may not have supported his overthrow, his name being there reminds people of an important part of our history, which people will miss. So people like Kweku Azan write that. Is that we shouldn't oversimplify things. The fact that his overthrow of Nkrumah may, on hindsight, be seen to be unpopular does not mean that the name celebrates him. If you name something after somebody, it's not a celebration. It's a commemoration of an era.
No, then
so like his name, Kotoka, there is not because we think Kotoka is the best person in the world, but it reminds us of where he was shot and the fact that at a time in our history, some people felt Nkrumah had to go and Kotoka led that charge.
That's the mess we are in now. But the point is that I completely agree with the idea that the airport had to be named, but we have not expunged him from our history books. That's something that happens in other countries where individuals are completely taken out from history books. Kotoka is still in our history books. Everybody knows that. It's just that symbolism also counts in promoting nationalism and patriotism. And what a particular symbol stands for is critical. You understand? It's critical. So I have no problem.
I'll leave it there. Doc, thank you. Happy independence, and may Ghana get to where we all hope it gets to.
And the same to you, my brother. Let me use the Ghana expression, Wogbejeke. Folks don't know that. Wogbejeke has two meanings.
We've come from a long way, and we have a long way to go.
So Wogbejeke, happy Independence Day.
Amazing stuff. Thanks for watching. We've been discussing Ghana's history through the lens of two big figures. I started off with an interview around the life of J.B. Danquah with the author of a new book, The Doyen and Berima, PSC Ochidakwe, and of course, Dr. Nii Moi Thompson. Always a pleasure talking to him, an economist and chairman of NDPC. Happy Independence Day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.